I have two pieces of artwork here. My daughter put these two pieces together, and it was an assignment to use something other than pencil or chalk or paint. She had to use something different. It was like do 7 projects, and they all need to be different. So she completed it, and she's like, "Hey, Dad, what do you think?" I'm like, "How did you stick those on there?" She said wood glue. And I'm like, wood glue's not going to work. So we used epoxy. So this is the first one we did. And notice there's almost 0 bubbles. Here's the second one we did, and there's bubbles. So all you got to do is use a torch. I did not use a torch. Same batch of epoxy out of the same jug, that is. All right. So why are there bubbles in this one and not in this one? Stay tuned and we'll figure it out. Shut up. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these jugs of epoxy and we're going to fill up the sink with hot water and just soak them in there. I just want to warm them up a little bit so it flows a little easier, it mixes a little easier. We're going to get something to protect the floor. We're going to get epoxy everywhere. I have 3 mixing buckets. I have a scale. I have 2 pairs of latex gloves. Stirring stick. We have a sacrificial board that we're going to mix this all up on so we don't make a huge mess. What we're going to do is mix equal parts of A and B. And I use that with a scale. Everything that I've done in terms of using epoxy is accuracy is really important, and everyone harps about that. So I just try to be as accurate as possible. If you're off by a gram or 2, it's not that big of a deal. Depending on the size of your batch, if you got a whole, like a gigantic batch, a gram or 2 is not that big of a deal. But the smaller the amount, the more accurate you should be so that it doesn't remain sticky the next day or something like that. You want it to be rock hard the next day or whenever you go to use it. The longer this stuff stays wet, the more likely it is for dust and debris and crap like that to find its way into it. So you don't really want that. I'm going to turn it on. So I'm going to do a tear, which gets us back to 0, and it totally ignores the weight of the mixing cup. We'll go to 6 ounces of component A. All right, so we'll go to 12 ounces of component B. This stuff was sitting in a warm sink for about 10 minutes. If the jugs had more in them, I would have left them in there longer, but there really wasn't too much at the bottom of each jug. 12 ounces. Mix this thoroughly for a couple of minutes, right? I got a nice piece of maple here, and that way it doesn't splinter. They tell you to make sure you get the sides really good, because you'll have one component stick to the sides better than the other. So I kind of I like to take this mixing cup and I like to kind of spin it in my hand, and it's just a little easier operation. I tip it, the whole jug, I tip it, just a little bit, and then I just slowly rotate it in my hand, and I feel like I'm getting everything off the sides. And they tell you to mix it for a couple minutes straight and vigorously. These 2 components chemically are not really trying to mix together very well, so that's why they tell you to really just mix it for a couple minutes, because they don't like each other. They're like brother and sister. The brand name of this epoxy is MAS, M-A-S, and it's the Tabletop Pro. I've had good luck with this. I try not to jump right into expert level on this stuff because it's expensive, it takes a lot of time, and you can ruin, what would otherwise be a really nice piece of artwork or, a piece of furniture or something. If you think that you know everything there is to know about epoxy on your first try at using it or applying it, you're gonna learn some things on that first pour. I have found I've done dozens of epoxy projects, mostly on tabletops and charcuterie boards and that sort of thing. And I would say every time I've used epoxy, I've learned a little bit more. More especially about the bubbles, the mixing. I do a lot of epoxy on live edge pieces, and I have found that this stuff will find a way from the top of your workpiece down into the bottom and leak out, and that's pretty frustrating. The more you use out of a jug, there's more air in that jug than there is epoxy, and you tend to get a few more bubbles. The more you use out of the epoxy jug that you have on hand, the more likely the bubbles are going to be. So I would say that the most problems I've had with epoxy is after I've used over half of the jug. The second half of the jug always seems to have more of a bubble count, if you will. I'm going to get all of this epoxy into a new container. So I'm going to mix it again. I'm going to pour this right in the center of that image. Make sure that it gets in the image really well. But all of these pieces of glass were adhered with wood glue, and I don't think that wood glue is going to adhere to glass very well. My instinct to go with 12 ounces may be a tremendous amount too much, but it seems like it's just right. Obviously, there's going to be an overflow to the sides. My original thought, I was going to pick up this piece of artwork and just tip it in all four directions slightly. But you know what? I don't think I have to. Now, one thing I just thought about is as it rolls off to the sides, it's going to now adhere itself to my sacrificial piece. Now, once I run to the bottom of my mixing cup, they tell you not to scrape the sides of the original one, but I've scraped the sides of the second container from time to time, and I don't believe that's been a problem. I'm looking for the sharpest pieces of glass, and maybe just dripping the epoxy over top of that will maybe make it a little less sharp of an object. See, there's plenty left when I scrape the sides of this. And I'm sure there's guys out there that never scrape the sides of the jug or of the container. But you know what? I don't believe on the second container that I've ever had an issue with that. So I'm just gonna do what I feel like doing and break the rules. If that irritates somebody, that's okay. I'd be willing to bet that there is not a dry cubic millimeter on here, on the plywood at least. Question comes up, how long do you gotta wait until you can, just pick up this piece of artwork? Normally what I do is I mix it up, I pour the epoxy, and I just leave it for the day. Then the next day, we're good to go. I found a couple of large nuts. These nuts, I'm gonna put one underneath each corner and then lift and slide back onto those, and it's off of the substrate. The epoxy's had a chance to kind of flatten out and overflow off to the edges. And so I'm just going to go through with my finger, trying not to cut myself on the pieces of glass that exceed the sides. I'm just going to rub the epoxy onto the edges so that it's somewhat finished. You have to be mindful that whenever you're using epoxy, This stuff will get anywhere. My shop floor has more epoxy than a cement at this point. So just because I think I get super excited about creating and I just want to get into it. And I just don't take enough time to prepare my space, because that's not the fun part. But neither is walking around weeks later going, oh my gosh, you idiot. Why didn't you just lay down a piece of plywood or a tarp or something? So go ahead and take the time to prepare a space to create. There's so many pieces that I've done out in my shop now, and I have left what everyone thinks is a puddle for the first couple of weeks. It's laying on the floor, and they kind of step over it. It's kind of fun to watch. It's disappointing to me that I didn't take a little better care, but knowing what I know now, I try to take the time and think it out clearly and come up with a good strategy on how to pull off a nice piece of artwork. And I think it's going to be a cool piece when she's all done with it. She's going to want to get into more projects like this for herself, because this could easily be a tabletop. If you put a border around here, I'm just going to give you the simple version, but if there was a border all the way around here that rose to the top of the sharp pieces of glass, and you left a little space around the border, you could fill that with epoxy up to the point that's flush with that border, and this would be a pretty cool tabletop. All right, so here's what I think. I think that when you empty the contents of the epoxy out of the jug, air is stored now in the jug. So the more empty it is, the more air there is. In addition to that, I think that after a while, maybe that air just sits inside that jug. But then when you open the jug up again and introduce maybe new air to it, then there's an even bigger probability of bubbles. Now, I'm not going to take credit for this. Actually, a young man that worked for me named Justin, I shared with him this observation of mine, and he brought it up to my attention that maybe it's because there's more air in the jug than there is epoxy. So full credit to Justin. Doesn't surprise me. The kid is just brilliant, smart, and he caught on really quick. But I'm going to take the credit for just kind of keeping an eye on that and seeing what happens next. And I think that I can honestly say this myth is busted. So thanks for following along. Stay safe, stay busy, and keep the epoxy off your floor.